Welcome back to Econ 103, Introduction to Microeconomics. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the liberalization of trade and the application of a tariff. So in this scenario, the expectation is that you've already watched through our trade videos. You already know how the tariff gets put into place. You know the idea behind it graphically. You're here because you want the extra walkthrough for the mathematical steps. So in this video, what we're going to do is we're going to be calculating, hey, what is our new quantity supplied, quantity demanded underneath the world price? What is our new surplus underneath the world price? Then we're going to adjust from the world price to applying a tariff, and we're going to work out with the tariff what is our new supplied, demand, quantity imported, and what is our new surplus. So consumer, producer, social surplus, that is, we're going to be conducting our welfare analysis. We're going to start off with the scenario that we actually know the original allocatively efficient equilibrium, and that is in this case here the domestic equilibrium. And then we'll jump to calculating it for the world price, that is for once we've opened up to trade. If you're not sure where those numbers have come from as we move over, so let's just take a look at that. If you're having a hard time and okay, where did we get this 70? Where did we get this 20 from? Well, please go back, take a look at the first one that I have in this series of walkthroughs, that is the price floor. And I go through calculating the initial market clearing price and allocatively efficient equilibrium, as well as the initial surplus, consumer, producer, and social underneath this scenario. But let's go and take a look at what happens when we put in trade and, well, international trade, and as the law of one price takes hold and this world price ends up dominating. Let's take a look here. So starting off, let's just put in our world price of 40. So in our scenario here, 40, let's kind of eyeball that to be somewhere around here. And we'll identify that as PW for the world price. And I'll note that here, that is 40. Now, as we go through with this world price, we're going to have, well, through the law of one price, yes, we had our domestic price for 70, but consumers now can say, oh, I can buy the locally made product for $70, or I can buy the identical foreign made product for 40. Well, our consumer is going to buy the one for 40. So as a result, we push down to this new world price. Our local producers might try to initially keep selling them for 70 locally, but they're not going to have any luck selling them because all our consumers are buying them for 40. So eventually all of our producers lower their price as well. Many of the producers drop out of the game until we only have a few left at this world price of 40. So taking that world price of 40 across, we hit our first line, our supply curve. We can take that and draw it down. And what we get is our quantity supplied. Same idea, take our 40 all the way across to our demand point and bring that across, and we're going to get our quantity demanded. Now, okay, we have all this excess demand. Typically, this would be a problem in our normal scenarios, but in this case here, because we have trade, all of this excess demand, well, this is just satisfied, right? It's not just excess demand that's wasted and nothing happening. All of this excess demand is satisfied through imports. That is, our local producers cannot satisfy it, but we can just buy from foreigners instead. So we import the difference. So big difference between, say, our price ceiling scenario and the world price scenario is that instead of just excess supply, we have imports. Okay. So what we want to do is we want to figure out what is our quantity supplied in this scenario, what is our quantity demanded in this scenario, and how much are we importing. Once we figure all that out, we want to conduct a surplus analysis, and we need to figure out, hey, are we better off or worse off moving to free trade? Who are the winners of this move? Who are the losers of this move? So let's get started and take a look at that. First, let's calculate our quantity supplied. Now, how do we do so? Well, the hint is that it's the quantity supplied, and in so we're going 40 a price to our supply curve to get this value. So let's invoke our supply equation. We get price equals 10 plus 3Q. And in this scenario, we have two unknowns, but we know the price. We know that to be 40. The Q is really the one we're trying to solve. So let's update that. 40 plus 10. Sorry, that's sloppy. What am I doing? 40 equals 10 plus 3Q. Okay, now we want to do some algebra to solve for the Q, so let's isolate it. Let's bring the 10 over. So we're going to have 30 equals 3Q. Divide both sides by 3, and I get 10 equals Q. Now, okay, we just went through a bunch of math. Maybe you've forgotten, what Q are we solving for here? We have two of them. Well, okay, in this case, two ways to keep that in mind. 10 is less than 20. So, okay, it's likely that guy. How else can we figure this out? Well, we invoked our supply equation. So, hey, there's my supply line. There's my read-off from the supply. So what I've done here is I've calculated my quantity supplied to be 10. Perfect. Now, how much is being demanded altogether? Well, we got the quantity supplied off of our supply function. We'll get the quantity demanded off of our demand function. So let's go through that. Invoking our demand, we have price equals 110 minus 2Q. Again, the price is known to be the world price of 40, so we update that. 40 equals 110 minus 2Q. Again, we want to isolate that Q to figure out what it is. For me, I take this extra step. I get rid of this whole negative because I tend to make mistakes with negatives. So I'm going to add that to both sides. I'm going to go 40 plus 2Q equals 110. And that's just my step in order to make sure that I don't drop this negative or do something silly with it. Now, continue to isolate my Q. I'm going to get 2Q equals, what's 110 minus 40? That's going to be 70. Divide by 2 for both sides, and Q equals 35. Again, which one is this? Well, okay, we only have one left, but 35 is bigger than 20, so likely that guy. Additionally, we solved this off of our demand curve, so 40 to demand gave us our quantity demanded. So we get 35 as our quantity demanded. So how many goods are we importing altogether? Well, our local industry is able to produce 10. We are wanting to buy 20 or 35 altogether, so we are importing 25 units. So 25 units being imported, all said and done. Great. Let's go and conduct our welfare analysis. Let's determine our consumer, producer, and social surplus. This one's a little bit different from how we've been doing it. So let's really walk through this and see what's happening here. Okay, so consumer surplus, we'll go consumer surplus 1 because it's the new one. Our producer surplus 1 because it's the new one. And our social surplus 1 because it's the new one. And in this scenario here, right, this is all of our agents, consumers, producers, and society. Same as our initial case at our initial equilibrium. Okay, consumer surplus. Consumer surplus is the difference between what I'm willing to pay and the price I actually pay all the way up to the amount consumed. So in this case here, I get this massive triangle as my consumer surplus. Right? This is absolutely massive. This is going to take me a while to shade it all in. Okay, and through the magic of post-production, it's done. So we have that entire triangle to calculate as our consumer surplus. And keep in mind, right, the big distinction here is in previous cases, we've said, oh no, we have a disequilibrium between quantity demand and quantity supplied. The lower of the two becomes our quantity exchanged. Not so in this case, because in this disequilibrium situation, we just import the difference. So producers are able to produce a small amount, and consumers are still able to consume the bigger amount. So we do have this distinction happening here. So below my willingness to pay, above the price I do pay, all the way out to the quantity consumed. For my producers, what's going on for the producer side? Well, for the producers, this is going to be above my willingness to accept, all the way up to the price that or not priced, all the way up to the quantity I produce. So I'm only producing 10 units. So above the willingness to accept to the quantity produced, below the price I do accept. So that's a pretty small little triangle we have going on there. So we have my producer surplus as such. So let's go through and calculate these, starting off with the consumer. 1/2 base times height, just area of a triangle. So we have a base of 35. I have a height of 110 all the way down to 40. So, hey, 110 minus 40, that's going to be a height of 70 altogether. So what does that give me here? So I have 1/2 times 35 times 70. That gives me a new consumer surplus of $1,225. Wow. Consumers were initially earning a total surplus of $400. They're now earning $1,225. Take a look at this. The entirety of social surplus used to only be $1,000. So consumers are earning more just themselves than all of society was earning before. Massive gains in this case. What about producers? What's happening to the producer side? Well, okay, again, just a triangle, 1/2 base. In this case, our base is 10. Times our height. What's our height in this case? 40. So we get our producer surplus 1/2, 10 times 40. That gives me altogether $200 worth of producer surplus. Ouch. Producers used to be receiving 600. They're now getting only 200. We see that our producers have clearly lost in this scenario. So altogether, social surplus, what's happening here? We take our consumers plus our producers and we get our social surplus. We get $1,425 as our social surplus. So winners and losers, we see that consumers have clearly won, right? As we've opened up to trade, we're now able to buy at a much lower price. Our consumers are much better off. Unfortunately, as we've opened up to trade in this import sector, well, the import sector is hurt. They did not have a comparative advantage in this good. So they contract. As they contract, the surplus they receive falls. So in this case here, the import sector, these producers are hurt. But altogether, society is better off. So we have consumers winning, we have society winning, we have producers being hurt. So not so good in this case. What about with the tariff? What happens as we impose a tariff onto this world price? That is, the producers have made a whole bunch of stink. They've been hurt too much by this liberalization of free trade. They want some protections to be put into place. They want a tariff so that they can ramp up their production a bit. So let's take a look at that. Let's put in a tariff. Let's see how things change. What I want to do is I just kind of want to clean up our surplus, throw it up into the corner there so that we can kind of refer back to it as we move through things. So let's quickly do that. Okay, so we have our updated surplus. We have the initial surplus from our domestic market. We have our updated surplus with free trade. Let's go and impose a tariff, and we're going to have a tariff of $6 per unit. And let's see how things change, how everything is updated. So again, the way that this works, this is a per unit change in the price. Every unit imported ends up costing $6 more. So while the world price is 40, we end up getting a new price of, let's carry that across. This would be my price world plus the tariff. So that would be 46. 46 being the new price that we end up seeing underneath this scenario. So at 46, we're going to have a new quantity supplied. We see that, hey, higher price domestically, because we face this tariff, our producers, domestic producers, able to ramp up production. But higher price over to demand, means that our local consumers, well, at a higher price, they're not going to want to consume as much. So we had our quantity supplied, we have our quantity demand, and again, these are underneath the tariff that was just imposed. So what we want to do, we want to solve for this new quantity supplied, solve for this new quantity demanded. The way we would do so is the exact same as we did it in the first case. That is, we would just invoke, we want quantity supplied, we'd invoke our supply equation. Price is 10 plus 3Q. We have our updated price of 46. And we just want to go through and solve for our Q. So going through that quick step, we see that our updated quantity supplied, oh, I put that S in the wrong place there. There we go. That updated quantity supplied is 12, so we're producing a few more units, and our updated quantity demanded is 32, so we're consuming a few less. Let's quickly update that on our diagram here. Again, I didn't go through explicitly those steps, but you can see them there, and hopefully you can solve along, as it's the same steps as when we went through it the first time to solve for our 10 and our 35. Okay, so we have our updated. With this too, we're going to have our updated amount of imports. So keep in mind, we're going to be importing less in this case, 32 less 12. We're now only importing, oh, let's use the right tool to actually write that down. We're now only importing 20 units. So we're importing 5 fewer units altogether. Part of this is because we're consuming less. Part of this is because we are producing more domestically, right? We're consuming 3 less units. We're producing 2 more units domestically. Okay, so we've had this change. Let's reanalyze and let's redetermine what our welfare is. Consumer surplus, producer surplus, social surplus. Keeping in mind, we've just introduced the government in this scenario here. A tariff is just a tax. So we now need to figure out, too, what is the benefit being received by the government. So let's quickly clean up and we'll re-solve. Okay, so starting off with just, again, our raw diagram, nothing shaded in. Let's start off by, well, let's not be lazy. Let's write down what we're looking at. Consumer surplus, producer surplus, and this is going to be consumer surplus 2, producer surplus 2. I'm then going to have the government 2 and social surplus 2. So again, this is in my final case. We had our initial at the domestic equilibrium. We had our first case underneath free trade. We now have our final case underneath the tariff. Solving for these guys, well, let's go through it. Again, let's just visualize it, starting off with our consumer surplus, below our willingness to pay, all the way up to our number of units consumed, 32, above the price we have to pay. That's the world price with the tariff, 46. So we get our whole area here. A little bit quicker to shade it. Producer surplus. Well, that's going to be above our willingness to accept. So supply curve, willingness to accept, all the way up to our quantity exchange, which is now 12, below the price we receive. Well, we now receive $46 per unit. So all the way up to that, we get our producer surplus. We instantly see that this is going to be a little bit bigger, right? So producer surplus, red triangle. We now have the government. Well, the government's collecting a tariff, that is a tax per unit of $6. So that's the height difference between Price World and Price World plus tariff. So we have this height being collected all over 20 units. So we get this box here. This box here is going to be our taxation or our tariff revenue. So we have all of our actors now, and we have their corresponding areas determined. So let's go through and calculate. To start off, our consumers. 1/2 base, well, they're consuming up to 32. That's a base of 32. Times height, well, our height is 110 minus 46. We have a height of 64. Okay, so 1/2, 32 times 64. We get a consumer surplus of 1,024. So we see that in respect to the fair trade situation, consumers are worse off. But in relation to the initial domestic case, yeah, they're still better. What about producers? Well, we again have 1/2 base. In this case, our base is all the way up to 12 times height. Well, in this case, our height is 10 to 46, so we have a height of 36. So working that out, 1/2 times 12 times 36 gives us 216. So hey, by putting in this small tariff, we see in relation to the fair trade, producers are a bit better off, 216, but still worse off compared to our domestic scenario. And that will always be the case. There's no way we can have trade and have the import industry doing as well as they would have domestically. It goes against the idea of them being the import industry. We then have government. Well, we just have this yellow rectangle here as our government tax revenue. Base times height. Well, we're importing 20 units and we're charging a tariff or a tax on each of those units equal to $6. So altogether, 20 times 6 gives us $120 worth of tax revenue. We have all of our agents accounted for, so we can now calculate our social surplus. 120 plus 216 plus our 1024, that gives us altogether 1360 as our total social surplus. We see that in relation to the free trade scenario, we are experiencing some deadweight loss. This was our highest possible social surplus. This is, of course, lower. So we have deadweight loss, and that's equal to the difference between the two. So 1425 less 1360. We have lost $65 worth of surplus because of this tariff we've put into place. Of course, where does this deadweight loss show up in the diagram? Well, this deadweight loss, we'll use the brown triangles for that. That's this little bit here and this little bit here. That is these two little triangles that are just unaccounted for now. And that accounts for altogether our 65. Okay, so that was our scenario of having a domestic market, liberalizing to free trade, and we got to see all of our gains from trade by liberalizing, right? That was our 1,000 up to 1425. So hey, our gains from trade were $425 in that case. We then were able to put in some protectionary measures. In this case, it was a tariff. And by putting in this tariff, we witnessed the updated surplus and the deadweight loss that we face as a result. In our scenario here, we saw that as we liberalized, consumers were better off, producers were worse off, society was better off. If we were to compare free trade to the protectionism, well, we can take a look and we can see that in this case here, consumers are worse off, producers are better off, government is better off, and society is worse off. Again, that is in relation to our free trade to protection. If you have any questions about this video or any of the content covered in it, please feel free to comment below. Leave a post on our frequently asked questions on D2L, or of course, feel free to send me an email. Thanks. Until next time.